webinar is on a book called Motivational Interview. This is actually the third version of the book, Motivational Interviewing. And the interesting thing about this is they've rewritten this thing. It in essence has the same principles, but they've evolved it a little bit, added a little bit. And they say that between the first and the second edition and the second and the third, that there's about 90% of new writing and material. So while it was something that we were all introduced to back in the 90s and the early 2000s, rereading this copy is fantastic. The interesting thing for me in reading Motivational Interviewing by Miller and Rolnick this time was how much more than I even imagined it was in line with Evoke's philosophy. In fact, one of the stages of motivational interviewing is evoking, which is pulling out from somebody their inherent wisdom, the wisdom that's inside of them. So I'll describe what motivational interviewing is by definition. I'll describe the phases of interviewing. I'll talk about what they've added to it, and then I'll talk about how it applies to our work today and how some of the things that we do in parenting really do get informed by this kind of theory. In fact, in all of our relationships, one of the things that they say in the early part of the book, and maybe the introduction, is while they talk about clients, while they talk about patients, while they talk about clinicians and practitioners, it really does apply to most any relationship where you're in a leadership position and you are encouraging or facilitating change in other people. So with that lead in, let me get to the slides tonight, to the information. One of the chapter headings has these quotes. Things do not change, we change, by Henry David Thoreau. And from Proverbs, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing personal opinion. I was describing to somebody today the idea of therapy. And somebody was asking me, I was in a social situation where somebody was asking me for information, collaboration, consultation on things that they were getting presented with in their job. And I was talking about, they were talking about being in an abusive relationship, either that of a child or that of a spouse. And what would you say to somebody? How would you coach them? And part of what I said is, it's not easy, especially in the adult situation, to tell them what they need to hear right away. Because what you're going to get initially, of course, is all the reasons why that wouldn't work or why that's too terrifying or uncomfortable or impossible. And so therapy is this art of moving along with somebody and getting them to a place where they can either say for themselves, discover for themselves what they need to do, or listen to some kind of suggestion, some kind of idea or concept. So, I talk about this joke with my own therapy, that at one point I imagined that my therapist had learned a lot of things in the past 5 or 7 years. And I made that joke with her. Unfortunately, she hadn't. In fact, several of the pieces that she had written, she's published about 13 books or so, several of the pieces that she had published back in the 1970s, even in the 1980s, contained some of the core principles that I was just awakening to. So part of the process when we're trying to encourage change in our children, in our clients, is to find that rhythm, to move along with them and to help them identify. Early theories of change, a lot of the practice around addictions, what was to engage somebody in a confrontive manner, right? To come head on with them. And oftentimes their lack of response was dismissed as being about their pathology, being about their difficulty to be open to change. What they started to look at was this idea that maybe someone's resistance is an indication of the quality of the relationship between the therapist and the client, right? It took a much more accountable perspective and a frightening perspective for therapists who wanted to maintain enough distance to not have to do their own work. And I think the same can be true of parents. We can start to understand that some of the issues that we have in our family with our children are not only an indication of something that might be going on in them, for them, but also might be evidence of something about the relationship. Generally described, they define motivational interviewing as this. Motivational interviewing is a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. It is designed to strengthen personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. I think it's really just a good definition of being in a relationship with somebody who's struggling, and being in a helpful relationship with somebody who's struggling. So there's a few things in here that I want to point. Number one, this idea of this atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. The one thing they added between version number 2, which I think was written in 2002, and then this one, which was written many years later, was an emphasis on compassion. And that's something that we talk about at Evoke a great deal. In fact, it's one of the differences when we reimagined wilderness therapy back in 2014 and started this next iteration. It was with an infusion of compassion. It's one of the reasons why we're changing the impact letter to a hopes and intentions letter, because it's going to be more nestled in compassion. But also something else, there is something to the language, right? It's a way of talking. It's a way of expressing oneself. And they pay a lot of attention to the words. That's why we're so specific sometimes with the language that we coach with you. Right? The impact letter instructions, now to be the hopes and intentions letter, those instructions ask you to avoid certain words and to use certain phrases because they tend to evoke change, to encourage change instead of to evoke resistance or defensiveness. Motivational interviewing, they go on to say, is a collaborative conversation style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. MI is first and foremost a conversation. I talk about this a lot. Therapy is not something you do to somebody. Therapy is something you do with somebody. It's a conversation. That's why when people ask me, what are you going to say in session? I only know what I'm going to say to start off with. Usually it involves a question. But based on what the client, the person, the parent is saying to me, that's the path that we go down together. The path of discovery and awareness, insight, understanding, and so forth. Eventually coming to a place where we develop a plan together. We develop a plan that arises out of the client in the program, or the parent's truth, the parent's awareness. Your purpose is to understand the life before you, to see the world through this person's eyes rather than superimposing your own vision. Again, all of the emphasis that I talk about with seeing somebody, with being able to find their river, find out where they grew up, how they grew up, find their context, because in their context, everything makes sense. In their context, all of their symptoms, all of their diagnostic categories, right? The way that we would describe what their presenting problem is, all of those things make sense. So when we look at it, when we look upon it with compassion, and they make a very clear distinction that a lot of parents bristle at when I talk about acceptance and compassion in our program, or reflective listening, which is a huge part of motivational interviewing. It doesn't mean that you're condoning it. It doesn't mean that you're endorsing the behavior. It means that you're looking upon it with understanding and compassion. Stephen Rolnick, one of the authors, both the authors talk about how they developed this concept of motivational interviewing. And Stephen Rolnick had this to say. He said, denial could be viewed as the expression of a dysfunctional relationship and damaged rapport, and could be transformed in a positive direction by using a more collaborative style with clients, like I was just saying, with having it be a piece of evidence about the relationship between client and practitioner. I realized with some shock that the personal and professional inclination to blame, judge, and label others for being resistant and not motivated was not confined to the addiction field. That's initially where they had studied it. It popped up in just about every care setting I came across. Motivational interviewing provided a different way of approaching these conversations about change. It's really easy. As a therapist, you get well equipped with a lot of tools, a lot of descriptors, a lot of language to dismiss the client, right? To talk about that. I see it in mental health and addiction all the time. One of my quotes is, just because somebody is resistant, just because the disease of addiction or depression or whatever the mental illness is, the mental issue presenting itself is, just because it's significant, it ought not to exclude our own evaluation in the process of engagement. They talk about this idea of righting others, right? Writing others is basically imposing on somebody else the right truth, the right way. It comes from this deficit model, right, where you don't have the truth, you being you or you being your child in the program. So I'm going to tell you the right things, tell you the right way to go about things. And they talk about, and this one thing about this book that you might like is that it is well grounded in research. There was some research before they wrote the original, but since then there are hundreds of research studies that look at the effectiveness of motivational interviewing. Writing could also be something that I talk about in my book, where we talk about being right. Right? That myth of I'm going to tell you the right thing or argue for or debate for the right thing. They tend to lead others to be angry, agitated, annoyed, irritated, not heard, and not understood. Defensive, discounting, judge, justifying, oppositional, unwilling to change. Uncomfortable, ashamed, overwhelmed, eager to leave. That's just essentially shame. Or powerless, a passive, one down, discouraged, and disengaged response. On the other side, utilizing motivational interviewing concepts and sensibility and language, when we don't use writing language, when we evoke from somebody their own truth and awareness, responses tend to be engaged, interested, cooperative, liking the counselor, ready to keep talking. You know, it's a tricky business, this idea of liking your therapist or not in the wilderness. I think early in my career, I assumed that all of a student, of a client not liking me could be attributed to their resistance. Right? That's how I approached it. At least that's how I kept myself well defended from my own self-evaluation. But I found later on that much of that dislike, being angry, was because I was missing, because I was doing the writing with the client. It can't all be, I want to be very clear, it cannot all be relegated to that, because our clients in many cases as adolescents are required to come here. The young adults, there's a lot of leverage that's being used. And so just by being in that role as the practitioner in our program, there's going to be some of that anger. But we can also find a way to line ourselves up with them in such a way and really make the enemy, the adversary, right? Really make that the symptom, the mental health issue, the disease, whatever it is that's getting in the way, that's causing the suffering. Going on, when we use motivational interviewing, clients tend to be empowered, able to change, hopeful and optimistic, open, accepted. They feel accepted, comfortable, safe, and respected, and they feel understood, connected, heard, and listened to. So we can do better at this, even with clients that are resistant, reluctant. In motivational interviewing, they talk a lot about ambivalence to change, right? That it's like, think about getting on an exercise program or trying to get rid of one of your vices or adopt a new healthy practice in your life. You're aware of a reason to do it, and you also have the example they gave is, I like to get in better shape, lose some weight, but I really like eating. I know I need to do it for my health, but I've tried it before and it doesn't work, right? We have that duality about us. And so motivational interviewing, again, helps us as practitioners, will help you as parents to learn how to respond to them in a way to point out the ambivalence, to honor it, and then to activate the part of the child, the part of the client, the part of the young adult or the parent that does want to change. The spirit of motivational interviewing is compassion. That's the biggest addition to their latest version, their latest draft of the book, their latest edition, I should say. It is compassion. Compassion is the wish to see others free from suffering. I think that's the essence of the hopes and intentions letter, right? I want you to be free from suffering, and we're unable to give it to you at home. So here's this intervention that we believe might be able to help you. They talk about the partnership between therapist and client. The partnership nature of motivational interviewing implies being attuned to and monitoring your own aspirations as well as the client's. In therapy, we call that countertransference. And if my agenda, my anxiety, and I think this is even maybe easier to recognize as a parent, or easier to fall into, I should say. Maybe not easier to recognize, but easier to fall into. My need for you, the child, to get better, to change. My aspirations. I need to be aware of and monitor those and own those. Remember, like I always say, it's not to not feel them. You can't not feel them. You can't not want your child to be better, to be okay, to reduce their suffering. But you can own it and not hand it over to them as a means for change. This partnership aspect of MI, the spirit of motivational interviewing, bespeaks the profound respect for the other. Right? It's a respectful, honoring process. Here's an illustration of the spirit of MI. It has 4 circles: collaboration, acceptance, evocation, and compassion. And when all of those are lined up, then you have the spirit of motivational interviewing. All of those are part of the ingredients in. Let's talk about the stages, the phases of encouraging or facilitating change. The first one is engaging. It's really just about developing a relationship. Engaging is the process by which both parties establish a helpful connection and a working relationship. Right? You can't bypass it. Doesn't matter how much truth you have, how much wisdom you have to offer. You have to establish a connection. And that can be established in a lot of ways. Most often through some kind of humility. You're not putting yourself above them, better them. You're not righting them. Right? You're talking about, you're aware of your own challenges. With parents, a lot of the times it's start off with, I'm sorry. With my clinicians, my staff, I tell them, teach them all the time, learn to say you're sorry to clients, to really mean it, to really recognize that sometimes their reactions are evidence of the fact that you missed them, that you hurt them, and that you somehow re-injured or injured them. So engaging in a trusting, compassionate, cooperating relationship. Here's a quote about the engaging process. Your purpose is to understand the life before you, to see the world through this person's eyes rather than superimposing your own vision. Accurate empathy, an active interest in and effort to understand the other's internal perspective, to see the world through his or her eyes, her or his eyes. We don't mean sympathy, a feeling of pity for or camaraderie with the person. Neither do we mean identification. I've been there and I know what you're experiencing. Let you tell me my story. Those may or may not be present, but empathy is an ability to understand another's frame of reference and the conviction that it is worthwhile to do so. Carl Rogers, a very famous therapist, said, and his students described well the therapeutic skill of accurate empathy. It is, quote, to sense the client's inner world of private personal meanings as if it were your own, but without ever losing the as-if quality, right? Maintaining still a self, an awareness. The opposite of empathy is the imposition of one's own perspective, perhaps with the assumption that the other's views are irrelevant or misguided. As a parent, as a person, that last phrase, the opposite of empathy, this last sentence, the opposite of empathy, is the imposition of one's own perspective, perhaps with the assumption that the other's views are irrelevant or misguided. I think we've all fallen into that. And our children give us very good reason to fall into that. And simply put, pragmatically put, if that's what we fall into, if that's the place that we're operating from, we are less likely to have a positive effect on encouraging and facilitating change. Going on from engaging, number 2 is focusing. Focusing is the process by which you develop and maintain a specific direction in the conversation about change. I remember one time I was talking to my therapist, who I was doing some case supervision with, essentially. And I was describing one of my clients and the challenge that I was having with him. And my therapist simply said, you will by your very nature. Instead of teaching or imposing or kind of telling them the way it is, the things that you reflect in them, the things that you hear in them will be in that way a way to focus the conversation. You will know what to pay attention to, know what to listen to and to hear. And I think for parents, as you go through this process, a lot of you come into this saying, I'm a pretty good listener, or maybe I don't need, or maybe this is not about me. And then you learn to listen. You find that experience where you recognize that there's a deeper version of listening that we can all do better at. And then you do that. And then you start to hear better. You manage your anxiety, your fear, your anger, your frustration, and all of a sudden you develop a new capacity to hear and to see things that you couldn't hear and see. Our students, clients do that all the time. They'll say, I can hear what people are feeling and thinking. I can hear their beliefs in just the way that they're talking when I get out of the program. So you learn and you are able to focus and direct the conversation in that way. Evoking is phase number 3. Evoking involves eliciting the client's own motivations for change. This is the core of motivational interviewing, right? Highlighting, pay attention, underscoring. One of my favorite versions of this is this concept that the reason that people stop using drugs and alcohol, just to use that example, or you could use any behavior, cutting, whatever it is, the reason that they stop doing it is the reason they started, to feel better, essentially. People improve in their mental health or their recovery from addiction when they start to realize that doing it differently, doing it this other way, being in the world this other way feels better. It's that moment in our program where somewhere around late fire phase, early water phase, many of them, they have a taste of it. They know what it feels like. This is when we ask them to mentor others because they've tasted change. They've tasted the world opening up to them. They've had an interaction, maybe with you, maybe with us, maybe with their peers, where they felt it different. It came from a place of light and strength, and it's quite amazing. And then you highlight that. You build upon that. And then lastly is planning. Planning encompasses both developing commitment to change and formulating a specific plan of action, right? Talk about assignments, talk about practices, tools, skills, so forth. I know I have an anger management problem, so I'm gonna use timeouts. I'm gonna use my anger scale. I know I have a lot of depression. I'm gonna address my shame. I'm gonna practice mindfulness to deal with my anxiety. I'm gonna go to 12-step meetings to deal with my addiction. Whatever it is, you start to make a plan, both in the here and now and in the future. The important thing, and something I talk about in my book very specifically, technique doesn't do it for you. Motivational interviewing, they say, is also not a technique. It's not an easily learned gimmick to tuck away into one's toolbox. We describe MI as the style of being with people. In my book, I talk about it as a sensibility. There's no generic solution. It's a way of being with somebody. And I think we all want, as parents, as people, we kind of want these answers. That's why the most common questions I get from anybody is, what do I do? Give me the steps. And I don't know them because we're talking about human beings, not talking about objects that you can easily manipulate or manipulate even with a great deal of skill. We're talking about being in a different kind of relationship with the universe, with the world, with everybody in it. It really is what this transformation, what your child inadvertently, unconsciously invited you into this transformation. That's what the journey is. That's what the heroic journey is. It's a transformation, a place that you go through to change who you are. I like this list. This is a list of person-centered care taken from Rogers and some others that illustrate a core foundational principle of motivational interviewing. And I think it speaks so much to the parent work and the clinical philosophy at Evoke. This is word for word quoted. I did highlight and bold one word in here, of course. Number 1, our services exist to benefit the people we serve and not vice versa. The needs of clients, participants, patients, consumers, customers, etc. have priority. And in a lot of ways, that's parenting, right? I'm here. I get asked so often, when do I get to tell my story? Right? What about my side of it? And I've said this recently, the older I get, the longer I do this, the less I see the value of handing over to your child the story of your frustration, angst, anger, worry, whatever it is. I am okay with sharing it in a way to own it and be responsible for it. But if we give it to them for them to manage, we've turned it upside down. So our services or our parenting exists for the people that we serve our children. Number 2, change is fundamentally self-change. Services such as treatment, therapy, interventions and counseling, etc., facilitate natural processes of change, right? It is that idea that you have to want to change, but the magic of this art, this way of being, is to help people to see it, to want to change, to activate that part of them that wants to change. People are the experts on themselves. No one knows more about them than they do. We've just got to give them access to that. We've got to help them see what's in the way of it. Usually it's shame, right? Once we can get the things out of the way, the stuff out of the way that is blocking them from the wisdom that they have, that's the gold and the magic. If we just give people answers, that's the essence of the journey of the heroic parent, is teaching people how to think and becoming an expert yourself instead of relying on experts. That's one of the phrases that they talk about, is the expert trap. People are the experts on themselves. No one knows more about them than they do. Number 4, we don't have to make change happen. The truth is that we can't do it alone. Again, there's this line between, as a parent, as a person, as a professional, between doing what I do, being in a relationship in this way. I'm responsible for that. I can be accountable for that. I can evaluate myself. I can get feedback from others on that. I can do better. But we're not responsible for them changing. And that's a switch that we need to be effective. We need to switch. I'm responsible for how well I listen to my children. I'm responsible for the healthy boundaries I have. I'm responsible for the compassion that I show. But I'm not responsible for their changing. And the irony of that all is that the more that I do those things that I just described and the other list of things that we encourage in parenting, the more likely, the easier we make it, the more helpful we become at facilitating change. But ultimately, it's when you draw it down to, when you come down to who's responsible for what, we do draw that line. If we don't draw that line, we imply, we impose on other people that I can change you. And that's not true. I can just show up as the best version of myself. Number 5, we don't have to come up with all the good ideas. Chances are that we don't have the best ones, right? I think there's a lot of pressure. I think that's when we struggle. That's when we make it about the client, make it about the child. We don't have to have all the answers. Number 6, people have their own strengths, motivations, and resources that are vital to activate in order for change to occur. Finding those strengths. And when you get frustrated with somebody that you love, when they're practicing consistently self-defeating behaviors, we see those strengths less and less and less. That's why sometimes coming in as an outsider, I can say, yeah, this is your child has an incredible amount going for them, because I haven't been the one that's been the subject of their abuse and of being in a situation that has been so painful or stressful. Number 7, therefore, change requires a partnership, a collaboration of expertise. Again, the idea in the book is, I'm not an expert on your life. I'm an expert in a process. That's the essence of what I'm trying to teach all the time. I'm not an expert on your answers. I'm an expert on a process that helps you to find your answers. I don't know your truth. That's why when a child is making a decision in life later on, and parents will come to me and say, what should I do? And say to them, you don't know their truth. Your child is 25 years old, 35 years old. You don't know their truth. And that's not me saying that they're going to do everything right. That's saying that they will somehow, I have some confidence that they'll figure it out. And I want to be there to support them if I can, even through the mistake, because I want to be the first call that they make when they find themselves in a hole, right? I want to be a resource. If they call their old addict friends or their old boyfriend or girlfriend who was bad for them, their old peers who were negative influences, that's the people they call, because those are the people that aren't imposing truth on them, then I have less of a chance of being helpful. Number 8, it is important to understand the person's own perspective on the situation, what is needed, and how to accomplish it. Number 9, change is not a power struggle whereby if change occurs, we win. A conversation about change should feel like dancing, not wrestling. Number 10, motivation for change is not installed, but is evoked. It's already in there and just need to be called for. All right? We need to find it. And this book teaches you how to have a conversation where that gets amplified or focused on, that comes into the light. We cannot revoke people's choice about their own behavior. People make their decisions about what they will and will not do, and it's not a goal until the person adopts it. You know, there's some other methods. Rogers, they borrow a lot, and the humanistic therapeutic field. The 7 challenges, I've talked about that. Some people talk about that as an alternative to the 12 steps, and it's not really. The 7 challenges, in essence, is a 7-step process that is motivational interviewing. I would encourage you to look at the webinar on that, or to just Google 7 challenges by Dr. Robert Schriebel. And you'll find there that it's really a step-by-step process about how to have a conversation, how not to get into that old power struggle. Psychodynamic theories, right? The old Freudian version of therapy is a lot like this. You're not pushing against change. You're reflecting, you're listening, you're interpreting what you hear, reflecting it back. Right? That's part of what I do, is I hear what you say, what they say, and I give it back to you in a way and ask you if it makes sense. Yeah, I give it back to you with some insight, some awareness, some connections to other things, but I'm essentially reflecting back. That's why so often when people tell me, well, Brad said this, or my therapist said this, and I hear the real words that were said, that's not what was said. Brad didn't say your parents were jerks. Brad said after you talked about being hurt about something they did, that it must be hard for you, and that I'm sorry it was so painful for you. And then the person hears that through their own filter. Like I said, compassion. This is a quote about the compassion. There's an emphasis on compassion as the 4th element of the fundamentally humane spirit of which motivational interviewing is to be practiced. From Eric Fromm has described a selfless, unconditional form of loving that seeks the other's well-being and growth. In medical ethics, it is called beneficence. In Buddhism, metta. In Judaism, I can't pronounce it, hesed, characteristics of a mensch. In Islam, Rama, and in 1st century Christianity, agape. Right? Sorry for any mispronunciations there. But this is universal. Sometimes we like to borrow from other religious frameworks because if it's one different, then that's why the Buddhist is such a great framework, because it's universal in so many ways. And so whether a client is Jewish or atheist, agnostic, Christian, and you say, well, in Buddhism they talk about it in this way. Sometimes I'll say to somebody, in Christianity or in the Jewish faith, they'll talk about it in this way, especially if it's a different faith, because you're saying the same universal principles are taught in all of these constructs, all of these frameworks. But hearing it from somebody else's frame, it's less threatening. Whatever the name, they go on to say, it involves relating to those we serve in what Buber calls an I-thou valuing manner, and never as objects to be manipulated. Right? That's the difference between objectification. We're not giving you more effective tools to manipulate your children. We're teaching you how to be with them in a different way. And that does require some letting go. That does require facing some of our fears. And for those of you who have been at this a while now, you know what that feels like when you do it. For those of you who are new, it might not make sense, or it might seem contrary to what you're kind of signing up for and hoping for. But this, I'm going to pause here and just say that this is what we know. This is the most effective way we know how to help change children. Motivational interviewing is it's the ultimate. Right? It's a template that can be. You can have cognitive behavioral theory. You can have other dialectical behavioral theory. You can have, ACT therapy, all kind, reality therapy, psychodynamic therapy, family therapy, systems therapy, emotionally focused therapy, on and on and on. You can have all of those models, the 12 steps. But if this is not the foundation, this way of being with somebody is not there, you're likely to evoke a defensive posture, and less likely to make progress. And then your theory offers you tools and descriptions to blame it on the client or blame it on the child. So what are the take-homes? Our confrontation ought not to be fueled by anger, frustration, or exasperation. When we confront, it's about compassionately discussing with somebody their ambivalence around change. And to encourage change, we mustn't try to force it, but rather help an individual engage those parts of the self that are motivated to change. Parents may be at a disadvantage when fueled by emotions and their need for change, right? It's harder to create that, to live in that distance that allows you to participate in a conversation in the way that they're describing, that I'm describing tonight. Do your own work. You know, when I was answering my friend who was asking about somebody who had asked her about engaging with somebody who had a child that was not overtly, but subtly being abused, definitely not a good co-parent. She'd done everything she could legally, everything she could with therapists. She was presenting her helplessness to this friend, to this mutual friend of ours. And I said, at the end of the day, she's just got to do her work. And the child will be benefited by it. Right? The child is benefited. Our children are benefited by a more enlightened, more aware, more grounded, more capable, with a parent who's able to listen more, to see, a parent who takes on the responsibility of their own project, their own life, their own anxiety. All of that changes. You know, in Al-Anon they call it staying on your side of the street. And lastly, I'll just say that if nothing else, I think this is idealistic. I think this does come from a fantastic conceptual place. And if I were just speaking pragmatically, it works better. So if you want to be right, you want to debate, you want to say, well, this is the way that the world works, this is the truth, this is the moral rightness of this, you can do that. But what we know is that version of engaging somebody does not work as well. And there's the research to prove it. My own experience has shown me that, both as a client and a receiver, and my work with families has shown me that. So when my therapists struggle in their early training with this idea, they have so much energy about trying to change and change now and change quickly. And I start to talk to them about compassion and taking a step back and listening and not fixing clients, but finding clients. They say, but Brad, we've been hired to change people. And my response is, this is how you do it. The problem is that doing it this way requires us to confront our fears and anxieties and our own esteem, because we want it to be about somebody else. I've heard presentations about motivational interviewing in other settings. The presenters emphasize that the discipline requires years of training. How do we as parents learn enough about MI to use properly? I mean, it takes years, but start now. I'm better than I was 20 years ago. You know, most of this stuff is fairly intuitive in my practice. I do it pretty well at home. Not as well. I do it really well in my practice and pretty well most of the time at home. But get on it. I love what you're saying. It does. It takes years, and that's why the parents. When I meet with parents, you know, that have been in our program 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, in our parent support groups all around the North America, when I meet with them, they talk about this evolution. They're different, and the de-emphasis is on what their child is doing. They tell that story, but they say, and now this is how I'm dealing with it. This is where I am with it right now. So my book teaches the same thing as motivational interviewing. Theirs is a very formulaic way of talking about it, and they picked it apart. But the sensibility, right? That's the word. The sensibility through which the therapist or the parent participates is the same, as the essence is the same. And I think even acknowledging, you know, even showing up as a parent and recognizing that you don't do it right, that can be helpful. Apologize to your children. Admit your faults. I had a situation where a parent was having a reaction to a child in a parent visit out in the field. And the child could tell that they were biting their tongue. They said, I know they're trying to do better, but I can still feel the judgment. Still feel the anxiety. And I said to the parents, it's okay to own it. Like, I have an impulse, I have an inclination to do X, Y, or Z. I'm not going to do it, and that's my problem, not yours. I apologize after a session or after an interaction. I blew it with one of my children in a big, big way, in a big moment. And I was talking to my therapist about it. She said, it's maybe even better that you blew it the first time, because you kind of get a lot of things right. So it's probably good to blow it so they know that you're not perfect. Just go back and apologize. Show that side to them. That's okay. Your children don't need you to be perfect. If they do, they're doomed. They just need you to show up as a project. So be a project. Be your project. Thank you for the question. Great question. All right, I'm going to go into some upcoming events and announcement slides, and then if there are any questions, we'll get back to those. This goes along with this. We want all parents to attend 6 12-step support groups, either Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Nar-Anon, or for teenagers, it's Alateen. You can also go to NAMI.org for lessons and lectures and free services there in your area. In fact, I'll be speaking in Seattle to the local NAMI organization this week. Social media, follow us on our podcast, share the podcast with all your friends, spread this knowledge about what we've learned. The podcasts are essentially the webinars. They go up the next day. If you have an iOS device, that is an Apple device, go to the podcast app and search Evoke Therapy Programs. If you have an Android, then download the SoundCloud app and do the same search, Evoke Therapy Programs. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for inspirational pictures and stories and links. Go to Facebook, Evoke Therapy Programs, to find announcements and stories and lessons and postings there. You can go to the Second Nature Alumni Foundation on Facebook. Search that, and that's an organization that helps people that can't afford therapy. And you can also go to our blog. We try to post a couple of blogs per week. My book is The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Teaches the same kind of stuff. It's available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You can also get an audio version of it. If you go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon, through the Amazon Smiles program, a percentage of the proceeds goes to the charity to help people who can't afford therapy, and the price of the books are the same. I forgot to add a couple of on here. We have Seattle this week, Chicago next week, and New York in the first week of June. If you have any questions, email Andrea at evoketherapy.com to RSVP or ask questions about our parent support groups. Also, we will be in Los Angeles on June 11th at 4 p.m. for the potluck as usual, and then 5 to 7 is the parent meeting. And then in the Bay Area, we're going to be in San Mateo on the other side of the water to kind of play it even there. We're going to be at the San Mateo Marriott on June 12th from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Any questions or you want to learn about it or RSVP, email Andrea at evoketherapy.com. Upcoming workshops, we want all current families, if they possibly can, to go to these. These are 2-day experiential workshops, psychoeducation. You get to meet with our staff. You get to meet with other parents. The next one is May 27th and 28th at Entrada. You can pair that with a field visit if it's appropriate timing with your therapist at Evoke. Also, our next workshops, the one this month is closed already, and then in June, it's June 26th and 29th. Sign up early. And then we have one in July 17th through 20th, August 13th. You can go to our website or email intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. Finding you is for any individual. Finding family is for a family. And if you sign up for one of these time slots as a family, then we can turn the entire thing into a private intensive for your family. Our pursuits program, you can go to our website also. High adventure trips for families or young adults or adults. So it can be as few as 2 people. Father, mother, child, son, daughter, or it can be a family, or it can be a group of young adults, or even adults. It's therapy light, it's sober fun, it's really fun stuff, and the process is we help you make the connections between the therapeutic. Next question. The method makes sense, but is it really possible for a parent to overcome all emotions, especially after years of trauma with the child? We can do better. You know, the dialectical idea that I talk about in my book is you're always doing the best you can, and you can always do better. So you just get on the journey. That's all they need. They just need you on this journey. There's a blog that I wrote about how does a parent's limitations impact their child, and I described this. You're never going to get it perfect. You're never going to do it good enough by somebody's estimation. But you can do it good enough by just trying, by making it a project. That's the key, folks. That's my experience. Just make this work your project. Number one, it will have an incredible impact on your children. And number two, it will liberate you in all areas of your life. It's a new way of living. My next psychodrama, when is my next psychodrama workshop for adults? That is for individual adults, unless a family takes it first. It's June 26th through 29th. Any other questions? All right. I'm going to be seeing you tomorrow night. We're going to redo a webinar, how to choose the best fit aftercare for your child. So if you're still in the program, even if you're thinking about what the next step is after the step after Evoke is, I'll talk about that. So that'll be tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Look forward to talking to you there. It's one of our most watched webinars. So happy to redo it. Have a great 24 hours, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.